there's a little bit of introduction to OpenStreetMap and what is OpenStreetMap, and then where we are at the moment, basically. So, what is OpenStreetMap? This is the usual spiel, but as we all know, it's kind of a map. Hopefully we all know. It was basically created because of all the restrictions in the commercially available map data, and to try and remove some of those restrictions. So that's kind of the official thing. But yeah, what is OpenStreetMap? Is it the OpenStreetMap Foundation, which is the organisation that kind of runs the servers? Is it the map itself? Is it the planet file? The planet file is a weekly export of the entire database. So if you want to build your own servers, you can take that planet file, load it into your own database, and effectively set up your own servers. Is it the OpenStreetMap website? Is it the OpenStreetMap wiki? Is it the tools, the editing tools, the rendering? Is it the community? It's probably a much longer list. So those are kind of just some of the elements that make up, and I'm not going to talk about all of those in this talk because that would be a very long talk, but there are some of the things that maybe we want to talk about over the weekend. One of the important things is the license. One of the reasons it was created was because of effectively restrictions on data. So the original license was the attribution share alike license. Yeah, and the basic principles are great, which is you're free to share, to remix, and the conditions are you attribute and you reshare whatever you create. And this seemed like a really good idea. When Steve Coe set up the project, he could take this license, he used it, but there was a big but. The more people started looking at it and thinking of the implications, it turns out that people aren't even sure if Creative Commons share alike even applies to data, certainly in some parts of the world. There's questions on what constitutes a substantial piece of work and how it can be used and what you can copy. So basically it was broken. It wasn't fit for purpose, really. It wasn't designed to fit the database. It applies to a produced work map rather than the underlying data. So if I take a map, if I take the OpenStreetMap database, add a whole pile of my own things to it, and then produce the final work, the map, the final thing, the map that's created, the image, is protected, but actually all the data that was used to do that, I'm free to do with what I like as a producer. And it's hard to use in applications for those kind of reasons. There's lots of issues. So if I then got that printer map and I want to include it in a book, or if I want to include it in a TV news report, does the whole TV news report then have to be shared alike? So we have lots of problems like that. So there's been a long process to replace it with the ODBL, Open Database License. It keeps the principle, so it's still share alike. It was actually very recently been released, only in the last year or so. But there was a lot of feedback from OpenStreetMap, and it's kind of a copyright law and contract law. I'm not going to talk any more about the license, but it's worth mentioning that the process for the license has been long. The current state is that so there's kind of two parts to it, really. You've got to agree to the contributor terms. So the moment the current database is still CC by SA, at some point in the future it'll be released as ODBL, and we're at the stage now where you can't edit unless you've agreed to ODBL and the contributor terms. The main thing that has to happen is all the data that people haven't agreed to move forward needs to be removed or dealt with somehow. So that's kind of one of the big challenges in OpenStreetMap. It's a bit political and in the background, but I think it'll be for the better, and it should help the project move forward, I think, a lot once it's finally resolved. So why else is OpenStreetMap good? Well, Easter eggs. So if you look at an A to Z, you'll see this lie close, but in real life, there's a block of houses there. So kind of often maps will have Easter eggs to kind of help spot people copying them. Actually, OpenStreetMap can do a lot better than other maps. Here's the Bing map. I used to work in South Queensferry of that area. It's maybe not that entirely clear, the roads. I should have zoomed in a bit more. But it looks pretty bare. And the same area in Google Maps. It's worth noting that, for example, up in the top left, Ashburnham Lane is shown as joined to Ashburnham Gardens. This road here is Ashburnham Lane. Now, if we look at that same area in OpenStreetMap, it actually looks very different. There's a lot more detail, and actually lots of things that are broken are fixed. So those two roads aren't connected in real life, and we reflect that correctly. This road here, this little dog end of the road, isn't shown on Google Maps or Bing Maps. This road here is shown, my arrow's gone on that one, is shown on maps as Ashburnham Road, but locals and the Edinburgh Council website correctly indicate it as Station Road. There's steps, kind of extra detail that you don't see in other places. There's steps. Yeah, this road here is actually shown, it's Forth Park, but it's actually, other maps have it as Forth Park Terrace. The Forks Road at the top there won't appear on Google Maps. We have cycle paths, and we have footpaths. So that's a whole load of detail that you'll find on OpenStreetMap that you won't find on other web maps. And not only is that available, you can download that data and do what you want with it. You can print your own versions of that and distribute them, again, without having to ask anybody for permission. So that's actually pretty powerful. So it's a better map, and it's more powerful. You can also do your own things with it. So someone was talking about doing their own rendering. This is a kind of a project that I kind of started hoping to have it ready for August. But I started to do I thought it would be good to have an Edinburgh Festival's rendering of Edinburgh, and to actually pull the venues out, display them differently, and actually show the festival names rather than the normal names. So I'd kind of started work on that. But that's an example of one of the things you can do with that data because it's open. So how does OpenStreetMap do that? Well, first of all, it has a really simple data schema. This is looking at a bit more of a complicated area, but basically the database is there's three main structures when you create your map. There are nodes, which effectively just dots on your map. You can then join those nodes together to create something that's called a way. So in this case, it's a circle of nodes all connected. And if you've got multiple ways, so in this case we're looking at a building and there's a courtyard in the middle, so we need a way of representing that there's effectively a hole in that middle. So there's actually two ways. This is a way and that's a way. And then there's a thing called a relation that ties them together. So you've got nodes, you've got ways, and you've got relations, which is list of nodes. You need somewhere just.
A relation has a list of ways, is that correct?
A relation is effectively a list of ways. Yeah. You need some way of saying what these things are, whether it's a building or a road. You need some way of differentiating them, and that's kind of one of the powers of OpenStreetMap is its tagging scheme. Well, in this case, horse equals yes, because if you find something that you've never seen before, you can just tag it. You can think of your own tag. It's based on a completely open tagging scheme, so there's no rules in the database that say, oh, you can't use that tag. So if I see something that's never been seen before, I can then decide how I want to tag it. I don't have to go and apply to a committee and discuss it and things. There are ways that these mechanisms happen in OpenStreetMap where people come to an agreement about what's a common way to tag things. There's ways that doesn't happen. So, for example, there are discussions about whether something's a path or a footpath, or people don't always agree. But in general, people come to consensus, and there are conventions listed on the mapping website. So if you start from scratch, you don't have to sit there and do it all from scratch. And most of the tools now kind of support the default. So if you're using like the Potlatch editor or JOSM, they have like the default tags that you can use. But you can then build on that in the future. So that's kind of just a little bit about OpenStreetMap and how it works. But again, what is OpenStreetMap? Is it the servers? This is the database server that runs on. Is it the code that's used? Is it the community? This is Steve Coast, who started it, and Frederick Ram, who you may have seen on the database. This is the community again. This is those of us that mapped Edinburgh Zoo and created that in an afternoon, which you might have seen before. It's quite powerful. Again, an example of where we're going. This was this Edinburgh Centre, which I thought at the time when I took that screenshot, I thought was looking pretty good. That was in November 2007, Edinburgh City Centre, and that's what it looks like today. It's it's quite dramatic. So then, huge progress has been made. Again, if we go back, there's lots of streets there that have no names. There's, it's not all consistent. That's not filled in. There are lots of details missing. Now, it's good, and that's kind of reflected in something that Bob's been spending a lot of time looking at, which is how complete are we? So I've kind of gone through, and I think I pulled out all the places in Scotland off the ITO mapper thing. It actually looks pretty good, doesn't it? Everywhere on that page, 95%. Bottom half the table, not so good. But actually we're getting there. There's a big challenge here.
366 roads in Murray, give me a day.
well, exactly. There's a challenge. So currently, if I add all those up again, if I did the maths right, there's 4,316 roads missing. And again, assuming I included everywhere, so we're 93% complete, so actually better than you thought. So we're actually doing really, really well. And I put complete in quotes because, yeah, actually we'll never be complete. We've got all, this is just one measure, so this is the ITO measure. There are other measures. So for example, there's the Meridian 2 data set, which actually has road lengths on it. So there's comparisons with that. Again, the same kind of areas that actually have trouble on the list, which is again, that northeast corner, for example, is just really bad, and there's not really anybody up there. But there's not really. But there's enough roads that
We've got one guy in Inverness.
And we've got one guy in Inverness who's doing. You can see where people are. I mean, it's quite phenomenal.
Well, they've been on holiday.
We've got a place to stay in Forest Bob if you want to have that.
So maybe that's where we have our next State of the Map Scotland. So you've got lots of different measures like this, and again, completeness. Once we've got the roads in, then there's addressing, there's postcodes, there's buildings, there's gardens, there's public health facilities. There's kind of just building up the knowledge and the amount of data and the details. So that all needs to grow. So how do we do it? So I don't want to get into a fight with Bob here because we've had our arguments about this in the pub. And one of the ways we're doing it is tracing. And tracing is great because actually we can sit down, we can map places, and actually we can get to that level of initial completeness really quickly. And really the only problem is, how do we build communities in those areas? So, I've mapped by going around the streets, and I know things, and I can see when things change. And that's really I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and one of the things I think it'd be good to think about is, hopefully completeness will bring applications that use it, that will get people looking at the data, and that will then bring people in. Hopefully, I think that's what we hope to happen. We're on that path now. I think we should try and finish it, and it'll be great to be able to say, we've got all the roads in Scotland, because then people can actually use that data with a degree of confidence that it's at least as good as the other maps. Again, if you go back to the problem with tracing is if you go back to I should have actually included the Open OS Street View on that same comparison slide. A lot of the problems that are there on Google Maps and things are also there on OS Street View. Actually, not all their street names are right. Not all the road geometries are right. So actually, we do need people to go there. We do need people on the ground to put in the footpaths and the shortcuts and the walkthroughs and that local knowledge. But here's the problem. At State of the Map in last year, one of the guys was talking about who maps an OpenStreetMap and why, and the results are quite dramatic. 96% of, I think he got 400 odd people to fill this in. 96% of them were male. 32% were 20 to 30, 32% were 31 to 40. I did redo that and then I lost it. So age-wise, we got quite a good. 20-something%. 78% have a degree or higher, and 49% have no GIS experience. So basically, what we have is kind of youngish, largely young, male, educated, degree-educated people, and that's a big problem. And I think that's one of the reasons why we struggle in areas that are more rural, that don't have a university, that are far away from where people don't live, or people like us don't live, I should probably say. So that's a challenge, I think. Again, on a similar note, I think it may have been that State of the Map, another one. Mikhail Hackey at UCL has done a study, and he's looked at how the quality improves with the number of people, and he's basically shown, there's the link there if you want to go and read it. It's I'll put these online afterwards. And he's done a study that actually the more people editing an area, the better the quality can be. So once 3 people have touched an object, generally it's a very high quality. If just one person has touched it, then the quality is low. So immediately we have a way of measuring that quality. I'm wondering if in the future, once we finish the tracing, there'll be the next level of completeness will be tools where we can say, well, actually, what I want to see is I want to see the areas where only one person has looked at. And those are the areas we now need to go and visit to find out. These are the areas we need to encourage people to do it at. Again, in the city of Edinburgh, and this is from my page, within 1 kilometre of me, when it gives you the list of other users that are near, there's actually 30 people that have signed up and put their local address information in. So that was in 1 kilometre of where I live in Edinburgh, there's 30 people. Mother-in-law lives in Huntly and there's nobody. So there's the challenge. One of the ways we have been really successful, I think, is by hooking into existing groups. So one of those communities is cyclists. Certainly in Edinburgh, cyclists have picked us up. They've seen what's in it for them, and they've gone and they've mapped. They've made sure the cycle routes are in, the cycle parking, the cycle shops. They've actually made that data come together. And the challenge is, how do we extend our communities to beyond that? How do we find those other groups? How do we encourage them to use it? How do we make it easy for them? And how do we reach them? So, thank you. That's me.